Good afternoon. Welcome to 50/50 Carolina's Women on Boards conversation. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Jennifer Hunter. I'm pleased to be here with you and also our panelists while we live stream from the EY Technology Center in the South End District of Charlotte, North Carolina. I've co-chaired the Carolinas 50/50 Women on Boards campaign for the last 3 years. I'd like to start by sharing a little about 50/50 Women on Boards. 50/50 is the premier global advocate to increasing the number of women on corporate boards. We were founded in 2010 as 2020 Women on Boards with a goal of reaching 20% by 2020. Fortunately, we did reach our goal. In fact, we reached it 1 year early in 2019. Therefore, last year, we rebranded ourselves to align to our new vision of true gender parity. Thanks to ESG and many other positive external factors, we finally have the momentum on diversity in the C-suite and on public company boards that we've all dreamed of. To quote one of our panelists, Jorge Gomez, at a recent lunch, "I've been an advocate for women's advancement for a very long time. Not because I have 2 daughters, but because the playing field has needed to be leveled so that the absolute best talent is identified and used towards the betterment of the company and value to its stakeholders." So this year, we really felt it time to shift our agenda from talking about the benefits of the diversity to truly sharing wisdom from this esteemed group of panelists on how to plan your journey to the boardroom and how to be most effective when you get there. And who better to lead that conversation than Peter Browning? He's a Charlotte resident, and he has 25 years of public board experience. He's the founder of the Lead Director Network, based in the Carolinas. It's for 12 years, it's been a preeminent network and annual event to coach and provide the best training to board directors and lead directors. In fact, Peter's gotten so good at this, he started his own board placement firm many years back. In the month of November, we've held 30 events around the globe, just like this one today. Today, we'll first thank a few folks and sponsors that helped make this event happen. Then we're going to talk through the statistics regarding diversity on corporate boards. Then we're going to spend an hour with our incredible group of panelists. And lastly, introduce you to your peers in a small group breakout session where you get one-on-one coaching from a board director. I'd like to now quickly thank my co-chair, Jessica Bell Vanderwall. She's the CEO of Frame Fertility, and she's joining us remotely today from San Francisco. Next, I want to send a very large thanks to our executive committee. Holly from Train, Liz Harrison and Liz Houston from McKinsey, Catherine from Blackbaud, Deb from Corning, Di from Ally, Nithya from Comcast, Laura, who chairs our local NACD and serves in multiple corporate boards, Wendy, recently retired and on her first corporate board, Anne-Marie, Karen, Jessica from JP Morgan, RSM, and PwC, respectively. Today's event is also made possible by our director coaches. You can learn more about their corporate boardroom experience by visiting our website. And lastly, before we review our statistics and introduce our Carolina panelists, I want to show appreciation for our corporate sponsors. These are companies in our region that have stood behind our mission. Of our sponsors, I'm proud to report that every one of them is above the national percent average for women on board. There are a few that are at the top of the charts. Both Sunbelt and SPX Corporation have reached the optimal level, gender parity. JP Morgan and Train Technologies are remarkably close to parity at 40% of their board being women. Krispy Kreme, LabCorp, Ally, and Dentsply Sirona are all at or greater than 30%, which is 400 and 600 basis points above the national and Carolinas average, respectively. So let's talk about the numbers. We track percent of women on boards in the Russell 3000. Big strides were made both nationally and locally in the Carolinas last year. Getting to 26% has been quite the remarkable achievement. Next, we want to show the statistics for gender balance. The percent of corporate boards in the Russell 3000 that are at gender balance is growing at a fast pace. And look at what South Carolina did last year. In addition, our organization's mission includes support of and promotion of women of color onto corporate boards. We now have a goal of 20% of boards across the Russell 3000, including women of color. Currently, the data only shows 11% of directors are people of color, with an even smaller portion being women. So we've got a lot of progress yet to make. And finally, to our main event. We'll run for about an hour. We'll touch on some rich content surrounding what job experiences are of most value to boards. How do you get the most valuable experiences at your current employer? How you network to position yourself for a public corporate board opportunity. When on a board, what are the expectations of your time in between meetings to truly be prepared? What are some best practices on how to onboard quickly and successfully? And what exemplary qualities do great board members have? So next, I'll introduce the panelists. After the panel concludes, you'll exit the session, click on the EventMobi link for your breakout session, and enter your small group with your corporate director coach. And first up, Marcia Avendon from Trane Technologies. Marcia is Executive VP and Chief Human Resources Officer. Marcia has served on 4 boards, 3 of them public: Generac Power Systems, GCP Applied Technologies, and Lincoln Financial. Next up is Jorge Gomez. Jorge is the CFO of Dentsply Sirona. He currently serves as a member of the board of directors for Xylem and Pear Therapeutics. Next is Glenn Eisenberg. Glenn has served as the Chief Financial Officer of LabCorp since 2014. He's also served on 4 public boards: Family Dollar, Alpha Natural Resources, Ecology Networks, and Perspective Networks. Next is Angel Shelton Willis. Angel is General Counsel and Secretary of Sealed Air. Angel recently joined her first board, SPX Corporation. And lastly, I'm excited to give you a little bit more background on Peter Crane Browning, our moderator today. Peter moved here to Charlotte in the late 80s. He was the CEO of National Gypsum. After that, he was recruited by Sonoco to be the CEO there. He retired from his CEO career at around the age of 50 and became the dean of the McCall School of Business at Queen's University. He has been recognized by Board Alert Magazine as one of the 8 outstanding directors of the year for his role in successful CEO transitions at Lowe's and Nucor. Peter has been on 14 publicly traded boards, including Wachovia Bank, where he served for 10 years and through the financial crisis, Nucor Steel, 16 years, Enpro Industries, 14, Lowe's Home Improvement. He now still serves on Acuity Brands, ScanSource, and GMS, where he is the lead director on 2 of those public company boards. So I'd like to introduce Peter and turn over the panel for moderating. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Just to clear the record, I actually was 60 when I retired. If Kathy was listening, she'd wonder what the heck's going on. Well, we're here to do a couple of things. Number one, to celebrate the accomplishments that have been made over these last, well, now 11 years since 2020 started. Now we're 50. Remarkable progress, and you touched on some of it. And then we want to turn to how do we get to our objective, not by 50, but within the next 10, 15 years. And I think that's eminently doable. In addition to the statistics you shared, I also looked at the S&P 500. Out of 456 new independent directors, 72% were new, and more than half of the, well, you had 47% were ethnically diverse, 43% were women. Remarkable progress. And then you just talked about on the bigger statistic, if you will, well, anyway, we'll stay with, oh, here it is. It's the Russell 3000, which is 16.2% in 17, growing to 25.2%. So with all of that as background, and that's tremendous momentum. So the first question is there concern? I mean, it's great to see all that progress, but are we concerned that we're going to lose momentum? And what can we be doing to actually aid and abet that? So what failures and initiatives give you peace of mind that it will not slow? And so we're going to start with that question with Marcia. We're going to take advantage of the full panel because we've got great experience with this panel.
Yeah, I think the progress is remarkable. I do think we've got momentum, whether you look at the S&P 500 or you look at the Russell 3000. I'm an optimist. I think we're on a trend that's sustainable, and I think we can continue. Some of the things I see on the boards that I'm involved with, both at Trane Technologies in my day job and at Generac as a director, that give me confidence is that every search now that's done for directors looks both at the skills required, but also make sure we have really diverse candidates. And I think the boards are widening the profile of backgrounds that they're considering for directors. And I think that bodes well for getting more diverse candidates, both women and racially and ethnically diverse candidates. Because back in the day when you could only get on a board if you were a CEO, a recently retired CEO, or maybe a CFO, like some of my friends here, those days I think are behind us. Those skills are very important, but now a wider range of skills are being considered. So I think that bodes well as we get more representation in the top of the house, that there's lots of different roles that could be pathways to the director role.
All right, thank you. So I'd like to hear from the rest of the panel on that question. Your thoughts.
Peter, I can offer a couple of thoughts. I have no concerns about the trend. I think it's going to continue to improve, and I would point to perhaps two key macro dynamics that are going to continue to help with this momentum. One is transparency. So I think we are at a point in time where data, information, facts is available to everybody, and when there's more transparency, everybody is accountable. Boards, executive teams, everybody is accountable for delivering results, especially because diversity has been proven to be a great business tool to enhance shareholder value. I think there's many studies that show that companies that have boards are more diverse tend to perform better. And we are at a point in the business cycle, things are changing so fast that you really need the most diverse way of thinking to be able to keep up pace with all the things that are changing rapidly. And I guess my final point, I'm going to add a third point, is involvement from all stakeholders. Years ago, investors were not that involved in the companies. Employees were not that involved in important matters, and now everybody's involved, which is challenging for boards and for executive teams. But you have investors that are pretty active, and you have employees that are looking for many reasons to belong to a place. And diversity is a great tool of engagement. So those are the things that I would point to.
Glenn? Well, go ahead, Glenn. Then we'll like to hear from you.
Sure, though, maybe it's even just reinforcing some points that it always was before, diversity is the right thing to do. It's the equitable thing to do. And what's proven, as Jorge, shared, was that there's enough empirical studies now that show more diverse companies, more diverse boards create more returns, greater returns than those that are less diverse. So now we're away from just the equity part of it, as much as, for public companies, boards looking to generate shareholder value, looking to also be at the forefront of ESG, which again, as we think about all of our stakeholders, there's not a meeting that we'll have, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it, where ESG doesn't come up. And frankly, the most talked about aspect of ESG, at least relative to our shareholder base, has always been the diversity and the accountability at our board and throughout the organization. So I agree with the other panelists that the momentum is there. You know, we're at, call it a 30% rate of boards now have women representation. That's only going to get higher, as Peter commented. All the new directors, it's now a much greater percentage of new directors coming on are diverse, which is the right thing to do and should continue.
Yeah, and I concur with my panelists. I think that the momentum is there, and certainly I think there's just a number of executives, people that are engaged in boards, and then the productivity and profitability of companies. So I think you have the investors, you have employees, all have stake, are all stakeholders in how companies perform and how boards perform. So I think the momentum will continue.
Just to pile on just a tiny bit, the two largest holders of equity in the United States are BlackRock and Vanguard. And they're generally 20 to 25% of every company. They expect diversity.
Yeah.
So when your largest shareholder, you engage with them in a conversation, they want to look at what's the mix on your board. Are you adding individuals? And so I think all of that just adds more strength, power behind this momentum continuing. So with that, then let's turn to the next question. It's around board recruitment. So each company does this in a little different way. Some will use search firms. Some will use, does anybody know anybody sitting around the table? It's not unusual actually to use your, I don't know, I'd love to hear about that. Your matrix for the board, and you then develop a position statement, and then how do you go about filling that board? So Jorge, we'll start with you.
Yeah, from the standpoint of the board, I think a good board should have a long-term plan. You need to understand the needs of the company, the needs of the board, and have a 3, 4, 5-year roadmap looking at your existing directors, when they're going to retire, where the strategic plan of the company is taking you, and then you need to go back and see, okay, what skill sets do we need in order to meet the strategy of the company. It all comes down to the strategy of the company. And so that is a starting point. In terms of sourcing candidates, I'd say, in my opinion, the most effective way of recruiting the best talent is actually to go through search firms, simply because they have visibility into a much greater pool of talent. Obviously, networking is a great source of directors, and that will continue to exist. And it's good to have the backing of people that know you. But if you really want to have your roadmap and meet the needs of the company, you need to cast a pretty wide net. And recruiting firms do a very good job. Right now, in the last few years, about 40% of new directors come through search firms. I don't have an exact number on this, but I know that actually more than 50% of new directors that are diverse actually come through search firms, because I'm a realistic person. We all tend to hang out with people that look like us, that think like us, that like the same drinks that we like, and that is a limited pool. So you need to expand the pool, and search firms do that really well. The flip side, because I think one of the questions was strategies for people to get on boards.
I was going to wait on that.
Okay, you're going to wait on that, so I'll
So,
wait.
I mean, because that's really why they're all out there, and they want to hear about that. I want to make sure we spend enough time. So Angel, let's go back to this one about the strategy your board is using, looking for candidates.
Yeah, so I think about, both Sealed Air and SPX, I agree. I think recruiting firms are a great tool because they can really develop and have maybe a wider range of board candidates and have line of sight for individuals that you may not have thought about, right, as a board. So I think they're certainly great tools. I was recently reading an article about boards and recruitment and whether there is sometimes affinity bias, as they called it. To your point, Jorge, right, around, sometimes boards say, hey, do you know someone? Do you know someone? Well, if those boards aren't diverse, then they may not be able to pull from that diverse group of individuals. So I think looking at recruiting firms and then tapping also into some networks that maybe not as traditional as we've used in the past. There are a lot of councils, networks, that contain a lot of, great women and minorities at the executive level that oftentimes aren't visible to boards. So I think it's just really tapping into a wide variety of networks and then looking at those skill sets and see what makes most sense for your board from a succession planning perspective.
Yeah, I would just add that, when you look at the needs of the board and then you look at to expand it, and if one of the charges that you have is you're trying to add diversity to the board, it's really, they're not mutually exclusive. The search firms are there, they have a list of candidates. And as Marcia said, not only just what is the skill set that you're looking for, but also we'd like diversity or to add diversity on the board as well. The networking is really good as well. And really, people that because there's an affinity there already. Agree with Jorge, they may tend to look like you. But if you're looking at your broader network, it's not even just the people that would you be interested or you have that skill set. But once you reach out to that person at that company, let's say it's, well, who on your management team that you feel has these qualifications we're looking for, as well as the diversity. So the broader your network, the more that you're going to at least be in the game, if you will, including rather than just the search firms that are on the list, especially the further down you go, because from one respect, you have the C-suite executives that are already there that are known by the search firms that will come up. So how do you get if you're further down? You won't have that exposure, if you will. So that's where I think networking becomes even more important for those that are looking for the first board, don't have that background already. And the other one that's interesting too, and we always try to get the shareholders' perspective in this, a lot of times to go to minority-owned shareholder firms, they will really have a big cast of qualified people that they would view as a shareholder that says, this is somebody that we know would be shareholder friendly. They have really good attributes. They're not going to be recommending to you people that wouldn't fill that. So I think there are a lot of resources and for people looking to get on boards, tapping into all the networking and talking to the search firms, but being out there as well as letting people know of your interest, especially when you're within the company, talking to people that you work with. I have this interest. So when they're tapped and someone's asking them about an opportunity that may not be right for them, they can say, well, I also know these people that could be good candidates for you.
Yeah, I have just one thing to add is the recruiting firms do cast a wide net, but how do they find people? They don't know everyone. They're calling people they know and saying, hey, we're looking for a director with this kind of a profile. Who do you know? So but it actually all comes down to networking, because even the search firms, they have their database, but then they go check you out with people that they know who hopefully are in your network. Since I'm an HR professional, I get tons of those calls, right? And they might be from other directors, but they also are often from the search firms. So yeah, letting it, I totally agree with Glenn, letting it be known that you want to be on your first board and making sure you're networking broadly. I used to think when I was on my first board, Lincoln Financial, I used to think that the search firms really didn't have very much influence at all, that it was all networking. I think over the years, because of diversity and inclusion, great boards are using search firms more now, but they're using them through their network.
Right, well, we've touched on the other question, Jorge, that you referenced as part of this first issue, or second issue we're addressing. But what advice would you lend to current or retired executives, and particularly as the group sitting out there? You've touched on a bit of it, but it is like looking for a job. It's intimidating, and if you're working full time, how are you supposed to network? Where are you going to go? You go to NACD, you won't be alone. Most of the people there are individuals looking to aspire to boards. I'll bet you a large percentage sitting out there are looking to aspire to a board. And Marcia, you touched on it. The search firms are inundated with bios. And one of the challenges, you will know, being in HR, a bio has one or two dimensions of an individual, not three, and really trying to find out what that individual can contribute. What are they like in a group? Will you affect the chemistry within the board? No small matter. So if you wouldn't mind just touching again a bit on your advice and counsel for them sitting out there. Now what do I do? Am I supposed to take off from work? Do I go to NACD program? Do I go on at Harvard? I mean, what do I do to get myself prepared and let people know I'm available? So, well, I'll start. Go ahead. Marcia, do you want to?
You want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first, I think that boards are looking for great business professionals first and foremost that are broad and have had a big impact in some way in their corporation. And so I think getting great experiences in your day job, things that you think would be relevant to the boardroom, things that are strategic in nature, regardless of which area of the business you're in, regardless of which functional areas are your strength, whether you're a P&L leader or a functional leader. I think being involved with things that are strategic, that would be a board level interest, mergers and acquisitions, strategic planning of some sort. So I actually think your day-to-day work experience is probably the best thing to prepare you to be a great director. And the more variety, the more breadth in the kinds of challenges and experiences and circumstances you've led in a senior level role, I think that's first and foremost. And then, I would suggest in terms of getting your name out there, it's sort of what do you bring? Like what, besides being a great overall business professional, what do you bring? So if you are networking, if you're at events, what are the types of things that you think you could bring to the boardroom? And each one of us are broad professionals, but we also have maybe 2 or 3 things that sort of distinguish us. So making sure that's, as Peter said, make sure that's very clear on your bio, but also in how you present yourself. So I think to me, it's less about events or training programs as it is real relevant board level experience. And even have you presented and engaged with your own company board? I think that's a typical question that a new candidate for a director position is asked. Well, do you even understand what goes on in the boardroom? Have you been in the boardroom? Was it once you came in for a 15-minute presentation, or have you been in there longer, had dinner with the directors, interacted with them? Those are the kinds of things that sort of get you over the threshold that you understand even like sort of what goes on in a board.
That's good. Jorge, and you touched on it earlier as you were part of
Two quick things. First, I think the best thing you can do to try to get on a board is invest in your career. Put yourself in a position where you are a direct report to a CEO or be the CEO. Most boards want people with C-suite experience, people that have been exposed to boards and been faced with challenging decisions that for the most part you only get when you are at that level. So that first thing you need to do is do that. In my experience, prior to being the CFO of the company, first CFO role that I had, I got only one call for a board meeting ever, only one. I went through a process and I didn't get the board seat. Didn't get it. They told me you're great, but you don't have the experience we need. You need to be at that level. When I was announced as CFO, I got 2 or 3 texts from people saying, hey, let us know when you're going to be ready and if your board is going to allow you to be on a board. The same day, this is like 3 months before I became actual CFO. And then after that point, the calls just multiplied. So that's one thing. The other thing is, as part of networking, try to connect with board members, with people that you can ask if they can be your mentors, and by doing that, you get it kind of in the flow of information, and also get some tips as to what things you can do to be unique, as Marshall was saying before, that makes you a compelling candidate.
Glenn, let's go right down. I mean, there's more interest in this particular question than anything else when I think about the group sitting out there. So this is really well done, very helpful.
No, and I think, Peter, the way you've said it, that for those especially that haven't been on a board before, or those even that aren't on the C-suite,
Right.
Making it part of your job to find the opportunity. So as Jorge said, what additional qualifications could I be gaining that will help me? So I build up my resume, not just from the job that I'm in, but what are the skill sets? And there are plenty of matrices out there of just the individual skill sets that most boards are looking for. So how do you do that? It's an investment of your time and your money. There are a lot of courses out there, a lot of schools. I'm sure when Peter was the dean, I'm sure there are a lot of McCall schools courses or curriculum that would be for director education. subscribing to periodicals, going to the NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors. They would love to have people come and attend, not only that are current directors, but also those that are looking, because a lot of the curriculum is there. But it's like anything else. How have you achieved the success in your careers already? It's raising your hand. It's finding the opportunities that are there. As Marcia said, the broader your experience, the better. The more diverse your experience, the better, because at the end of the day, while call it the mystified level of the board, what goes on in there? Well, it's the same thing that goes on in the meetings that you sit in. You go ahead and discuss issues, and then you collectively talk about an issue, and then you use your judgment based upon your experiences. What's the right decision, or where would you come out? And the more you can have that diversity of experiences and letting people, again, know that of your interest and invest in yourself, the greater the chance that you'll be selected, especially for that first board.
And Angel,
Yeah, and I would echo the comments made by my panelists, maybe just a couple other things, which is really, I think, especially being a woman, you have to really be intentional and deliberate about participating on the board and wanting to be on the board. I had to learn that myself throughout my career, because I think sometimes as a woman, you wanted to do everything right. And it was really sort of being very intentional, very deliberate about your intentions and making that known to your network so that you can really use those relationships. And then secondly is, don't get too overwhelmed with all of the different programs and opportunities. Pick one, do it well, whether it be, a university, a board program, NACD, but pick something and educate yourself, continue to develop yourself. And use the network that is around you, build the quality of relationships as opposed to quantity.
those were great responses, really, very thoughtful, and shows the breadth, actually, and the depth of things you ought to reflect on of you sitting out there interested in joining the board. So with that great background, I wanted to share with each of us your own personal story of how you landed on a board. What did it take? So, Angel, you finished? We're going to start with you.
Yeah, so mine came exactly from what I just discussed. So really it was, letting my network know that I had, an intention to be on a board, putting together my board profile. And, thereafter, a colleague of mine received a phone call from a board, and she called me. And immediately, began talking to the board, and the process went fairly quickly, more quickly than I expected. I think that my, background and experience played very well with SPX and the board that I sit on. And I gelled and very well with the current board members. And so really that was a situation where the board said, who do you know? Let's use our own network. And I think it really worked out very well.
Glenn, let's just.
So for the first board, and this I think goes a little bit to Jorge in my situation, was Family Dollar stores way back when, through a search firm, but also kind of through networking, where the current chair of the audit committee was retiring from the board. And so they were looking specifically for somebody that was a financial expert that could chair an audit committee. So with the skill set, and then through the networking that I had established earlier, was introduced to the company that I had not known before. And what's interesting, and I'd also say, hopefully encouraging, is that in my background before then was starting out in banking and then with global industrial manufacturing companies. The first board that I got on was a discount retail store. So really nothing to do from the industry experience. And when you think about boards, and I know we'll talk more about this later, it's what is, again, the judgment, what are the skills, what are the experiences, and you look for the board to diversify those experiences. So if you have an area of expertise, it's not necessarily that you have to be the generalist and good at everything, but basically having a specific skill set, as well as, again, the broader the diversity of experiences, the better. But the board in its totality will be better because of those diversity of experiences, including the diversity relative to gender, ethnicity, and race. That combination helps. But again, there will be people that will be industry experts, but the more than not on the board will not be industry experts, overall.
Yeah, my experience was very simple. As I indicated before, I found my first real opportunity through a search firm. And the day I got announced as CFO, they showed me a couple of things, or told me that they could show me a couple of things. And then what was interesting in my experience, so the search firm helped with that. What was interesting was, and this is I think important to keep in mind, at some point when you get an opportunity, you will get more than one opportunity, and I really advise you to be selective. Make sure that you don't jump at the first opportunity that you find. Make sure that you believe in the purpose, the mission of the company, the culture, because that's going to make you, at the end of the day, a much effective board member. And I was faced with that trade-off or dilemma at some point because there was an opportunity that was put in front of me. I went through a process. We decided it was a good match, and then I wasn't sure if that was the company that I wanted to commit to for 10 years. A board assignment is a long-term commitment. It's not like any job where you go for 2 or 3 years and you may go somewhere else. This is a long-term commitment, and so that was an interesting experience going through that. Do I take this first time that I have an offer to be on a board? I really want to be on a board, or do I pass, take my chances? The next opportunity may not come up, and I think I made the right decision. At that point, I decided not to take that opportunity and take my chances and see what else could happen. And that was one of the better decisions that I made, because then I found an opportunity with a company that I really identified with. I love the mission, the purpose of the company, what they do. In my case, being part of a global business is something that I enjoy, that is important. And this company gave me that, and plus many other things. So, and then after that, other opportunities, as I said before, only one opportunity has been presented to me through networking. Most other opportunities, or all the other opportunities, were through search firms. So I would encourage you to actually get closer to the big firms, because they have a lot of volume available.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of interesting. It's a bit of a blend. So the very first time I was contacted to be on a board, I was a new chief HR officer of Merck. Similar, as soon as you get to the C-suite, you get calls, right? And Merck, obviously, a big iconic company. But I was interviewing for one that was a little closer to my industry core, kind of like what Glenn was saying. And they ended up going through a strategic change and decided not to fill the job. But the chair of the governance and nominating committee really liked me and had met me. And he was the CEO of an insurance company, of Lincoln. And I knew nothing about insurance, but he said, well, I'm going to be filling a board position. I really liked getting to know you. I really care about human capital, and it's important to my strategy. Would you consider interviewing for the Lincoln role? And I said, I know nothing about your industry, literally nothing about your industry. I'd been in global diversified industrials, I've been in consumer products, but I had never been, and obviously pharma, but I had never been in anything related to financial services or insurance. And he said, that's okay. I have people already on the board who are really industry knowledge. So sometimes you have to look at the board opportunities and think, well, what is it they want you for? What is it you're bringing? How do you complement the people that are already there? Then I will tell you, roll forward, my most recent one at Generac, industry really mattered. They saw Trane Technologies. They see a lot of similarities with Generac. When we started talking, I understood a lot of their strategy and what they were trying to achieve. They were trying to be more global. We were already quite global. And in that case, they wanted some of the functional skills I had, but they also really liked that I knew the industry or related industry. So it kind of depends. I used to think that industry didn't matter at all. I think it depends. I think sometimes your skill set could apply to multiple industries like finance or legal or HR. But sometimes they really do want some familiarity of how they make money and how they go to market. And I think it just depends. But I would say the relationships you build, even if you don't get the job, even if you don't get it, you meet people, and then later they may contact you anyway for another board opportunity, which was what happened with my first one with Lincoln.
That's great. Thank you very much. So we've touched on this a bit, but we're going to turn to how each of you on the boards in which you serve, how you go about looking for, well, determining what you're looking for, and how you go about getting to that candidate. You know, some will use search, some will use networking, but with that, talking about that question, Glenn, I'm going to start with you. Do you have a matrix? Do you use the matrix to decide you got the right skill? And with that as background, in this past year in the S&P 500, more than 1/3 of those directors were appointed for their first board. 33% of those, for reasons I'd like to hear from you all. They're functional line leaders. They're not CEOs. They're not CFOs. And they're other corporate executives. So it's a very different background we're seeing, particularly as boards reach out to attract more people of color, women, more diversity on their boards. And so, Glenn, we're going to start with you.
Sure, and we do use a matrix, and I think most companies do. And what's interesting, and again, feeds a little bit off of what Marcia was saying too, we have 10, call it experiences that we're looking for overall at LabCorp, and we actually put it in our proxy. So we show kind of to our investors, these are the skills and qualifications that we feel it's important to have on our board. And we're obviously in the healthcare and life sciences, so you'd expect one is, if you have healthcare experience, and for us especially clinical research. But if you say, okay, that's one criteria that we've listed, the other 9 are not healthcare specific. It's now rounding out the experiences. Now, hopefully you may have those experiences within a healthcare setting, but ultimately we're looking for strategy is obviously a critical role for the board. So if you've had experiences in strategy, executive leadership, obviously very important, talent development, developing people within the company, financial background or M&A are key experiences we would look for. Risk management has become much more elevated, especially as boards now have to oversee enterprise risk management in a more significant way. Technology, again, has really evolved, and depending on the company, plays a very big role, especially now, including, call it cybersecurity, that affects everyone, regardless, if you will, of your industry. Jorge talked earlier about being global. Is your company a global company? You clearly want to have people that have had global experiences. Sales and marketing, depending on what industry may play a little heavier than others, but a key role. And then finally, governance, an important aspect of the board as well. So we look at all the different criteria. Jorge mentioned earlier that as we're looking for the next director, what do you look at? Well, you look at all those experiences and see where are you well suited, where you potentially could use additional experiences. And then you look for that. And then on top of that, you put the umbrella again about diversity, about gender, race, ethnicity, to say, how can I still fill all those skill sets while continuing to diversify our board on that basis as well.
All right, good. So I'd like the rest of you to participate. I don't want to start with Angel, but like all of you, please.
Yeah, I agree with much of that. Certainly looking at a matrix and looking at how your own experience would complement what is already existing at the board. I think, it's interesting because I think in the past, lawyers were not considered to be great board candidates. And now they are, right? Because we get to see a really diverse mix of companies, right? From the legal experience to regulatory to cyber to a variety of things. And so I agree, having that diversity, having that matrix, having some financial experience, and now having experience around ESG and diversity, equity, inclusion, and human capital management are all extremely important on boards. And so I think it's about bringing the skill set that you have and really complementing your other board members, and then that will make for a great board.
Please.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that has been said. I would probably add just one additional thing, which is one dimension of diversity that is becoming really important right now, and is generation. Is where you are right now. Customer engagement, how to communicate externally and internally, is a totally different ballgame. And so when you have a board group that is a little bit detached or removed from a lot of things that are changing right now in terms of customer engagement and employee engagement, there's a gap. And so I know of situations where boards have been really interested in making sure that they have people that are digitally savvy, more in terms of the application of the digital platforms than in the development of the digital platform. So that's an interesting dimension that is becoming more and more important.
One of the things, so I'm thinking about Generac right now because we're actually going through a search right now. And yes, we have a search firm. Yes, we did the matrix. We had a couple of different skill sets that we were interested in. We definitely want diversity. We're particularly interested in getting more racial and ethnic diversity on the board. I'm one of 2 women. It's a smaller board than Trane Technologies, but what's interesting to me, and this is I think a good tip, once the search firm brought a whole bunch of profiles, that notion of widening the net, the discussion among the directors about which profiles stood out actually helped refine what we were looking for. So make sure that what distinguishes you, more than maybe even just the obvious things, what distinguishes you is really clear on your bio, because yeah, we thought we wanted, either, a line P&L leader or technology leader, and we wanted diversity. But then as we started seeing some of the backgrounds, some other things stood out. Oh, we would like people who've been through M&A. Oh, look, this person has that. So sometimes it kind of morphs or evolves in the process. And the tip is just make sure your bio really is crisp about what things distinguish you, because you'll get into this big pool, but then how does your profile get to the top, right? And it is a narrowing process. So, and then often, I'll be honest, because they're in the same space as where I've spent a lot of my career, I happen to know a lot of the candidates that the search firm brought forward. Either they worked with me, or I interviewed them, or I know someone who knows them, or whatever. And so the directors who are on, I'm not on nominating governance, but they said, oh, I see this person's in the HVAC industry. Do you know that person? Or I see they used to work at Honeywell, where you used to work. Do you know that person? And that's where the networking and relationship building and all that's so important. So make sure your distinguishing characteristics come out, and then working the network, even during the process. I interviewed for a board recently. I didn't get the opportunity, but I interviewed. I got down to the very end, and I think one of the reasons I was one of the last 2 people to be considered is they knew so many people that I knew. And as much as you don't want to, it was also through a search firm, and originally my name didn't come up because of that, but I think I got all the way through the process because it's who you know, right? We don't want to say that's true, but it is true. So
It is absolutely true, and references do matter. And you can have all these great resumes, you look at them, you will know nothing unless you've had a chance to cross-check.
yes.
And I am curious quickly, you have a candidate, and when you're down to the final one, does each board member interview them before you make your decision? Do you rely on the committee? Because that also makes it. So, I don't know. Angel, go ahead.
I think it depends on the board. The interesting thing I think about the pandemic is that we learned how to use Zoom and video. And so that has made it much easier for each board member to meet, new and board members and candidates. And so I think that now you're seeing much more of that the full board has the opportunity to meet candidates, because you don't have to take into account travel and can do it, virtually. So yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'd say that would be ideal. I mean, for each of the directors to see the final list of candidates to come in to provide input. But I'd say a lot of that responsibility goes to the nominating corporate governance committee, where they'll have and circulate, here are the candidates that we have that we're looking at. And then from that group, come forward to the board. Here is either the finalist, or here are a couple if they want to solicit the feedback for the remainder of the board. But a lot of times now, especially on boards, even though there are committees, so there are certain members on the committee and certain that are not. Most boards still open it up for people that, when you're not on that committee, to sit in on that. So if we're at a time where we are looking for director candidates, they would say and open it up for those not on the committee. If you'd like to sit in and provide your input, you have that opportunity.
That's been my experience as well, Glenn.
Yeah, mine too.
Okay, good. Well, just an observation. One thing I've learned over the years, no 2 boards are the same. If you've seen one board, you've seen one board. They all do things differently. So someone do the committee, they'll have the, so, anyway, it's just interesting as you start to engage with the company to find out what their particular practices are. So, I just had mentioned 35% of the directors were new, not served on the board before, 33% were functional line leaders. So what are each of you, we got quite sophisticated experience in this panel, what are each of you doing within your own company to aid and abet individuals that might come to you to ask about interest in a board? I know that happened on one of the boards I served. Someone came up to one of our directors, passed the name along. Next thing you know, we're CFO of a very large company. So, what are each of you doing in your own way to aid and abet and support, particularly people of color, diversity, and in that pool, obviously, I include women when we're talking about adding to the quality of the board and the diversity. So, let me see. I had Glenn. You're down here for that. We'll start with you, and we're getting everybody's input, and that's what really matters.
Yeah, no, I'd say first and foremost, call it the culture of the company, the tone at the top really dictates, how effective companies are going to be in developing diversity within the company and what programs they're putting in place. So the fact that the boards are now becoming much more diverse, frankly, they're putting more emphasis and frankly challenging management to make sure that the company represents and looks like the customers that we serve, if you will, and have diversity. And with that, now you have to be very proactive in how do you continue to promote and develop from within. So what now are you doing specifically as opposed to the desire is there, or we're going ahead and we have an open position, let's make sure we have a diverse person coming in. Well, what about once they're in? How do you continue to keep them versus wanting to go elsewhere? And how do you give them the skill sets that can continue to develop them further in the organization? One thing we did at LabCorp a few years ago, 2018, we put in place a program called our Women in Leadership Initiative that I actually am the executive sponsor of. And we put together specific plans and programs for our women executives, in this case, or leaders and future leaders to participate in. So one, which we call Ignite, was targeted for our, call it senior manager to director women. So a group of around 4,000 women that would really be educational programs that they would participate in that focuses on critical skill development and kind of empowering them. What do they need to do or do differently to kind of manage through the company? And I think it was mentioned earlier, part of looking for boards is similar. Part of looking for advancing in companies is it's an investment by the company, but it's also a big investment of the individual to kind of raise their hand and say, in addition to my day job, I now would love to be part of this program, which is kind of off hours where I'm going to get all this educational work to do and empower myself and better. In addition to call it that mid-level, we have a program that we call Elevate that's for our vice presidents and above. So now we're talking around 250 people within our company. That's clearly a much more engaged and customized program that actually takes 9 months while you have your day job, but using outside firms, speakers that we bring in, a lot of education, but really targeted on leadership and leadership skills. And at that level, you already have a lot of that. So now it's really trying to cross over and say, what can you do to and feel empowered to help affect the change in the company? Because ultimately that's the value and that's how you're going to continue to improve and develop. And the final thing, which ties back to, I'd say, the board a bit as well, part of these programs are if you haven't had exposure to being at the board, well, part of it is how do you present to the board? What do you do in a presentation that's different if you're presenting at a board than you might at another area? So the more confidence, the more experiences that you have. And I guess the final thing I'd add is that we brought in a head of diversity and inclusion back in 2020, really to help make sure that, we have the programs in place, we have a culture and a desire to continue to drive diversity within the company. Well, how are we tracking it? And so every quarter we have a report out at our executive committee. What are the statistics? Now, for our company being healthcare, 80% of healthcare decisions are made by women at home at least. And so we really try to promote the need for that. And for our company, we have around 69% of our employees are women. So good. But as you further go up the leadership tree at the senior most level, we have around 40%, which again is positive, still needs to improve. But again, this is part of the journey. But our head of D&I now is very active in the programs that we have, as well as when we go through talent development and succession planning, really participating in that process, making sure we're doing everything that we can to not only hire diversity, but to develop and promote from within.
Strong program. Angel?
Yeah, I mean, those are great. I think for me as a new board member, I think a couple of things, which is one, really, I found myself a few board buddies who I can speak with in between board meetings, before and after, and sometimes get, background, have a different discussion. So that's been really helpful as a new board member. And then just working very closely with the management team and the executives as well, so you understand the company and can understand strategically and directionally where the company is going, and right, and aspirations of the company. And then I think from a management perspective is exactly some of those things Glenn discussed, right? It's really being intentional about the professional development of women and racial and ethnic minorities, and putting together programs and I'll say practices that really enhance their development, because sometimes that's a little bit different than what has been traditional. So I think and then measure the progress and see, how you're progressing. I think that means speaking to the employees, speaking to those, executives, to figure out what's working and what's not working, what you can do better, really being open-minded about that.
Yeah, I think in terms of preparing people to be well positioned to be on board, I think there's a lot of strategies and programs, and I think they have pretty much all been mentioned. I've been very lucky in my career. I have been part of organizations that have very sophisticated talent development programs at the entry level, manager level, director level, VP level. And I've been part of those programs for 25 years, and I actually feel like I took advantage of those programs. However, I think those programs have not really, for many years, they didn't help with the numbers. They didn't help with actually increasing the presence of women and diverse people at senior levels. And I think what really started to make a difference and tip the scale is, in addition to all those programs, is to have better accountability that comes with transparency about the numbers. One thing that has been always very difficult for companies has been to make public gender diversity and other types of diversity numbers. And there were some legal constraints at some point, but I think a lot of that is changing. And as you put numbers out there, and in a lot of cases the numbers are not good, then you have to say, okay, this is my baseline. It's not good. We aspire to be better. These are my goals. I want to achieve these goals within a certain period, and then tie that to compensation. I think when you do all of those things, programs, goals, transparency, and compensation tied to that, I think you can make a big difference. And then a lot of people that don't have opportunities to be on boards will have those opportunities more and more over time.
Yeah, and I guess just to add to my colleagues' comments, I guess two things come to my mind. One, I think certain companies really do view being on a board for an executive as a development experience. So to the extent your company is supportive of you getting your first board, that really helps, right? So I would say for Trane Technologies, we do view that as a great development experience. So what do we do to help people get those opportunities? Even some of my colleagues on the executive leadership team, the enterprise leadership team, had not been on a board. And so, how do I as the head of HR, I help them identify what opportunities could be out there for them, introduce them to search firms. The next level down, the people who will be the future C-suite executives, we do some things I think they're not that uncommon, but I think they're super important. Every time we have a board meeting, we will invite a handful or two of high potential leaders, the next generation, and we'll have them. Sometimes they present at dinner, sometimes they just come, they're at cocktails, they're at dinner, they're getting to know the directors. So it's not so mysterious. We're very thoughtful about topical presentations that aren't just the normal standard fare, and who do we want to come to the board. have that interaction with the board. And so we're pretty intentional every board meeting about infusing that into the agenda and making that just a common routine thing. So many more people get exposed to the board and the board gets exposed to that talent. So it's really mutually beneficial. And then I would say for women and underrepresented minorities, we give them mentors and advisors within the company. There are 2 women right now that have said to me, they're vice president level women in the company, I really like to be on a board. I see you've been on boards, Marcia. Can you just meet with me and can I just pick your brain and ask you questions? And so I do that pretty regularly. And they just ask me questions like, what, explain how this works, or what's the typical cadence of a board meeting, and things that until you're there, you don't know, right? So I think that mentoring and advice from people who are kind of a generation ahead of you or a step ahead of you is another way to get that exposure and get that understanding of what it even means to be a director.
Well, you're being very intentional, because one of the board's single most important responsibilities is who's running the company, and then who's the successor. Because that's what you're exposing the board to are the individuals. And just keep in mind, I'll take 2 examples. Lowe's and Nucor, we met 4 times a year, 24 hours. That includes overnight. It's not a lot of time. Finding ways to get exposed to the high potential, or those that have the capacity to grow has to be very intentional. Part of the program is and of course you use dinners and other opportunities as ways of engagement. So I'm gonna skip a couple of those questions. We'll go back to them, but with all that great experience, the things we've just talked about, why don't you describe what you would consider the attributes of an effective, it says great here, but I'm saying an effective board member. Realizing no 2 board members are the same, and it's a group of peers, they all have to learn how to work together. So how would you describe, and you've seen obviously a number of them, and they're quite different, I'm sure, in what they bring to the party, but how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think a really strong director, first and foremost, is prepared. I mean, it sounds really obvious, but board materials, they're dense typically. They're dense. There's a lot of information. More and more now boards are sending directors all the committee materials, even if they're not on all the committees. A lot of boards, you're only on 1 or 2 committees, but I think the best board members read everything. They follow the company, they track the company, they listen to the quarterly earnings call. They actually act like they work for the company, and they're engaged with what's going on with that industry, with their business. I know that sounds really straightforward, but a lot of people who are still employed in another job have a lot of competing demands. I have seen directors show up and by the nature of their questions, it's clear they didn't read all the materials. That is not effective, right? And it's discouraging, right? So there's the be prepared. The second thing that, like any group or any team or any set of peers, there's the interpersonal piece of it, and that's the why they do references. Like what's the person really like when the going gets tough? Do they listen? Do they take all the air out of the room because they think they know everything? Or is it somebody that doesn't assume they always have the best idea or that they know more than everybody else? So some of those same things that make you effective in any other kind of team or leadership group make you more or less effective in the boardroom. But because you're all peers, it's a little bit different in that respect, and listening and seeking to understand. Because there may be times you have a different point of view. How do you express that in a way that's that you feel comfortable dissenting, but not in a way that's offensive or challenging in an inappropriate way? So I think there's know your stuff, be prepared, and then there's a lot on the interpersonal side. It's usually not what makes a great director is that, they're a great CFO or they're a great lawyer or HR executive. it's usually all that other stuff that makes somebody a great director. And then the other thing I would say is a director, this is probably really important. I think directors have two different types of roles. One is a fiduciary governance role. You're representing the shareholders. You're making sure that the company is in compliance, that there's nothing inappropriate going on, et cetera, and that the company is managing assets in a way that's representing the interests of shareholders. So that's kind of the official. But then most of the conversations, lots and lots of the conversations are what I call advisory. At the end of the day, the management team runs the company, the CEO runs the company. You're advising them. And just being really clear, is this a fiduciary matter? Is this an advisory matter? And if it's an advisory matter, don't overstep and try to run the company, right? Because you don't run the company, you're advising. And I think directors, particularly new directors, sometimes aren't that clear about which lane am I in, right? And so that would be the other thing I would say about great directors know which lane they're in. Are they in a fiduciary lane? Is this an ethics or gap accounting issue or, an audit issue or a compliance issue? Or is this an advisory issue? And how far do you go with your advice, and how strongly do you give that advice?
Well said. Angel, why don't
Yeah, no, I would echo the comments that Marcia made. Certainly I think you have to know whether you should be swimming in the shallow end or the deep end, and what is your lane and what's your role in that. Because certainly I think there are issues that as directors you have to jump in and really understand and drive and change. And then certainly areas where that's a management issue, right? And you're really advising, versus it's really being a fiduciary duty. So I echo the comments that Marcia made.
please, I'd like to.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to hear it because clearly doing your homework and being prepared, whether it's at the board meeting or anywhere, should be tantamount to what you bring. But ultimately, you hear a lot about collegiality and board dynamics, and you shouldn't read that as well. That means we're all going to agree on everything. It means that, frankly, the better directors, I would say, are the ones that are the more challenging. So not challenging because we don't agree with what management is let's say, raising, but challenging it to really get through the issues and hear them respond, that it has been thoughtful, because ultimately, again, the board is in the, call it advisory, but it's using the judgment. And some of the, you could argue the best directors, frankly, as you're going around the room, as we're going around and talking, fortunately, Peter is kind of, saying, why don't you start versus the other? Because there's some directors that will be the first one to want to talk on every single issue and kind of cloud out the room or get the issues.
Amen.
Some of the best directors are frankly the ones that come up last, not because they didn't think of all these great things that have already been said, but at this point, there's now something that hadn't been thought of, and tends to be pretty thoughtful. But I think the collegiality is really one with the respect, the transparency, the confidentiality, and appreciating that. And the more that you have that trust, the more that you can build that trust in the board, and the more effective you'll be, because the more open you'll be with the discussions that you have.
All right.
All very, very good answers. I think probably a few things to add. One, in terms of the effectiveness and preparation, I think part of preparation includes making sure that you're connecting with members of management, that you understand the business well and the strategy. Understanding the strategy of the company is incredibly important for a board member, because the role of a board member, as everybody has said, is not to run the company, but is to constantly challenge the management team with respect to the execution of the strategy. Are they doing what they're doing, and is that aligned with the strategy of the company? And one way of testing that is you need to know the industry, you need to know the competitive landscape, talk to other directors outside meetings. I think that is something that I was taught by a couple of pretty senior directors who told me, hey, as I was a new board member, they said, reach out to us, tell us if you have questions. And I did that. And then other people have done that. And when you go to the meeting, there is a little bit of an alignment and understanding of what are the key issues that are going to be discussed at that meeting. And it really helps the effectiveness of the meeting. It reduces questions that are not that relevant, again, to the strategy of the company. So I've learned that as a great tool to be a more effective board member.
Very good. So we've been talking about new directors, recruit them. Why don't we share a bit of your thoughts or practices on onboarding? How do we help these individuals? 33% are functional line leaders, 69% have never been on a board before. And I remember the first time I walked into a boardroom many, many years ago, I thought, I'm going to keep my mouth shut because I can get hurt in here. And it's intimidating, depending on your background, your age, and all the rest. So how do you, enjoy it? We're going to start with you. So how do you all go about within your own company and obviously in the board you're on?
Yeah, this is something that we've enhanced over time because I think certainly onboarding is important.
Yes.
And I think two things, which is one, developing a good relationship with the management team and understanding, each of the executive leadership teams, having a good working relationship with the CEO. So one is just that, and understanding the business, understanding the strategy. And then also understanding you as a board member, where you may, be able to provide value in that strategy. And so one, I think, is just those relationships you develop with the management team, and then certainly onboarding just from a board perspective. Me as a new board member, I've worked with now all of our board committees. So I sit on all of the board committees so that I understand all aspects of the board and the company and not just one aspect. I mentioned earlier board buddies, right, that I talk to before and after and between meetings. I do that also as well as even in my role as SPX as general counsel, as Sealed Air as general counsel. And so it's really kind of working those relationships. And then, as I said, benchmarking, understanding best practices, and being willing to sort of enhance and speak out as a board member and grow the relationships, right? I think that's really been the best value for me.
Yeah, no, I would add just that for the onboarding process, you're starting with a new company, a new board. You're not there to be the management, but you really need to understand what the company does, the strategy, and the people that are running the company. So investing the time to get to know the management team outside of the board meetings, and now again, the benefit of kind of Zoom, really a chance to even go further down. As you'd expect, reading all the material. There's a lot of material, especially for public companies, not only on the company and what it does, but also the peers. Who does the company compete with? How are they perceived? What kind of market position? If you're on a board in part because you bring a certain skill set, but you may not have that industry knowledge, that's an area that you really want to spend some time. But like most things, and you're in a board and you're starting out, listening does a lot. Listening and taking it in, because ultimately you're going to be part of that decision-making process, and you want to provide your own judgment. And the better your judgment is not only just the expertise you're bringing, but the more you get to know the people, the more that you get to know the industry and the issues that they're dealing with, the better you'll be able to contribute to that. But it is definitely a big investment of time getting up to speed, let alone just once you're up to speed, there is a wealth of information that you won't be lacking for getting to know what the company does.
I'd say visit customers, visit facilities, and talk to, so a lot of people that are connected, investors, for example, do that in coordination with the management team, of course. But having that firsthand knowledge of what's going on with the business is better than reading 500 pages of materials prior to your first meeting.
You read my mind. When I joined the Generac board, part of the orientation and the onboarding was visiting their major manufacturing sites. And there's nothing like seeing it firsthand, so you read my mind.
I do that.
It's interesting at the LabCorp, one of the first things we do is going with the couriers, the people that drive to pick up the sessions to see how they do it, going into the lab to see how the testing is performed, puts that big visual understanding.
Spend one day with a sales rep.
That's right.
Yeah.
Visiting customers.
Great suggestion. So I think that brings us to the conclusion. So Jennifer, you wouldn't mind coming up here just for a second, because you have done an incredible job in organizing this and your follow-up and engaging, trying to get as many people aware of what's going on, bringing them here, and then you put this incredible panel together. I mean, so they brought great experience, candor, and sharing it with everyone out there as they're thinking about what's it going to take to join a board, or how can I get on my second board. So Anyway, compliments on the job well done.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Peter. And I wanted to mention just a couple quick things. 50/50 Women on Boards has workshops. You can join NACD. If you go to peterbrowning.com, he's got dozens of articles that he's written that are posted there. Peter's written an incredible director's manual if you're looking for some more advanced content. This concludes our program. We hope you'll come back next year. And if you've got an extra half an hour, we'd really appreciate you going back into your agenda, joining a breakout session. You will not come back into general session from there. You will be able to enjoy your Thursday evening. So thanks again.
Everybody,
you.
bye-bye.
Good being with you.